Dr. Jazz.
With Hal Galper, like 3 months ago, and I think he's a couple of years older than you, right?
Yeah, he's about 75. He's about probably 81 or 82.
Yeah, and he was so cool, doing the Zoom thing. I was like, man, Hal, that's incredible. It's so bizarre, but so cool. I mean, I'm so happy that he's doing well.
Well, we're lucky we have that. Yeah, I talk to him every now and then.
Ah, you still have contact?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
They just released, well, he probably mentioned it, a concert in Berlin from 1977. So it's nice to have that out.
It's incredible. I mean, when we spoke, he said, you and Mike were like, for him, in his opinion, that's like one of the best periods of you two guys playing together. The band was so burning.
Yeah, I agree. I love those records, man. I put them on all the time just to kind of review that time period. It was a lot of fun, boy.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Some of that.
Okay, I'll save it.
Yeah, I checked some of the stuff, the 70s. It's just, I want to hear later about a week or a month in the life of Randy Brecker in, I don't know, 1974, because I checked all the records where you were on, and it's just, but anyway, it's bizarre when you think about it. All the concerts, record sessions and all, it's just, Yeah,
it was another kind of life, that's for sure.
Yeah, but you've been, I want to start first, with first of all, thanks so much for taking the time, Randy. I mean,
pleasure. You got good recommendations by friends, so I figured let's do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I had so many fun talks with so many musicians you play with. I did with Dean Brown also. We had so much fun, and many others, and Mark Copeland, and I want to talk about first. You've been extremely active, even in this lockdown period, so many new records coming out, and I want to first start with 3 new records that came out. And since I mentioned Mark, he's the one who kind of hooked us together.
Right.
And I've been a fan of Mark for such a long time. He's one of the most underrated piano players, and you guys did this incredible quintet record, and with some of my favorite players, Dave Liebman and Joey Barron and Drew Grass. And I wanted to ask you, how did this group happen? Because it's like a collab thing, right?
Yeah, it's a kind of a co-op thing, and all of us go back many years. Mark and I go back to high school.
Yeah, Mark told me you played the first gig together with Eric Gravatt, right? And
well, yeah, and Mike, my brother, I think they were actually more, I might have even, by the time they got together, I think I left for college. But I remember Mark and my brother on our side porch practicing. I think they were both playing alto saxophone by then.
Yeah.
So he goes way back. I knew his late brother who was in my class, and his parents were friends with my parents. So that's about as long as you can go back. Yeah. But even the other guys, Liebman was one of the first guys I met in New York City back in probably 1960. I think it was I got to New York in September of '66. Sometime those first three or four months, I ended up meeting him, Joey Barron, and Gress came a little later. Joey I met. Gee, it must have been mid '70s. We did we actually had a band with Bob Berg.
With Joey?
With Joey, and some great, we did a great record at Live at Sweet Basil, which was also recently released, also the video, with Dave Kokoski on piano and a great German bass player, Dieter Ilg.
Yeah, sure, I know Dieter. Yeah.
And that's burning, man, Live at Sweet Basil. It just came out. Once all these records came out around the same time, just by happenstance. Too many records came out at the same time.
No. Good times.
But that's a good one because it also is a DVD and CD package with different sets on each, different tunes on each thing. So see if you can find that. But and Drew Gress, we met a couple years later. So this band goes way back. We're old friends. We played a lot throughout the years, and it was just a really easy record to put together. We all went to Brooklyn and recorded for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and they took the best of what we recorded, and there it is. I think it's called Friends or something to that effect.
Quintet, yeah. But also with Liebman, you guys go. I mean, there's one song there, "Off a Bird," on this one, like kind of inspired Parkerish kind of. But you and Liebman are like, like this. Did you guys play a lot together, or? Yeah,
the story is, and Mike or Mark might have mentioned this. There was a famous loft on 19th Street.
No.
Sadly no longer there. Was a parking lot next door. The whole block has been is gone now. It's all high rise. But this was a 3-tiered or 3-floor loft. Liebman lived on the 3rd floor. There was a wonderful kind of funk drummer and pianist named Howie Wyeth on the 1st floor, who incidentally was the grandson of the famous painter Andrew Wyeth.
Oh yeah, I love him.
So and the 2nd floor eventually was habitated by Chick Corea. So it was all 3 floors of music, and eventually my brother was on the 3rd floor when Lieb moved out, and I think Dave Holland was on the 2nd floor. There was constant just musicians going in and out. Most of the sessions were in Liebman's loft, and we just played for days, weeks together up at his loft, usually music like that, more in the free zone. So we were old hands at that, and we always had kind of a connection when we did that. It just, I don't know, we just fit together really well. He was one of the most fun guys to play with in that context.
Yeah.
So we just fell back into it on this record.
Yeah, I love it. It's like I said, it's just like when I listen to you guys, it's just like a water, you're like so beautiful.
Yeah, there's definitely a history there.
Are there some, did you guys sometimes record these free kind of sessions in lofts, or are there some like bootlegs kind of,
I'm sure there are, probably Liebman, and I have some too. I just recently found some reel-to-reel that I want to digitize.
Oh yeah.
With Lieb, various people. Lieb started a performance arts group called Free Life Communications, and we got enough grants to utilize a concert space that I guess he had leased, and there were a lot of concerts that came out of that. For about a year it lasted. Free Life Communication. Also just found a tape of me and my brother playing with Dave Holland and Barry Altschul, which later became a Conference of the Birds. Dave used other guys, his close compatriots, Sam Rivers and Braxton.
Anthony Braxton, yeah.
Yeah, but we were the kind of, I guess you would call it the rehearsal band. But I remember Mike and I did really well, and I also found that reel-to-reel. So I'm in the process.
Man, come on.
So I'm in the process of digitizing that stuff. I don't have a reel-to-reel recorder, but I have a neighbor, a wonderful engineer, 5 minutes from here, and she found a couple places where we could do the transfer.
Yeah.
Short one with Chick, me, and Steve Schaefer, and Walter Booker, all from the 60s and 70s.
Man.
So it was in an old drawer somewhere. So we'll see what happens with those. But yeah, there are a lot of tapes, because everybody, at least on cassette recorders, when that became available, we recorded a lot of the sessions. And I know Liebman must have a ton of stuff, because that was the main focal meeting point. And if I could go on a little further, the other place, and it was a little different style of music, I talked about this somewhere. Gene Perla had a loft with Don Elias, and usually Jan Hammer was there when we all first came to New York. And stylistically, that was more kind of Milesian, Tony Williams, Herbie kind of style. We played free, but in that style, and played tunes, and it was all kind of based on Miles's band. Steve Grossman would float back and forth. A lot of saxophone players, Bob Berg, my brother. You know, it was an exciting time. A lot of loft jam sessions going on.
Wow. Now it would be so much fun to hear that, you know, because to hear you also play on this more relaxed, free format in a way, you know, because that must have been burning, like, you know, 20-minute songs and solos and stretching it out.
Oh yeah. And there's a
beautiful.
Gates or Perla, that's his nickname, has a record company, PM Music, and I think he's released, or there's a website where you can hear a lot of that stuff if you research it. You know, it's all, a lot of stuff is just on the website. Some of the sessions.
Yeah. Wow. Okay,
So
I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I love these sessions always because it's just like, you know, like live gigs. It's
well,
so
it's even, you know, this was just for us, so there were no audiences, so we were just, you know, whatever we felt we would play.
Yeah. But you know, you mentioned Mike, and like also the other record that I saw, it came out, the Live and Unreleased.
Oh yeah,
90/80, kind of recently, and you know, for me that's like one of the best versions of the Brecker Brothers. I don't know how you see it, but like that band, just like, it's incredible. And what's your view on that band? I saw some footage from Norway. There's a video of you guys.
Yeah. No, I agree. That band is, I guess, is well known after the heavy metal bebop. That was our probably biggest seller with Bozio and Finnerty. But that particular band did a lot of touring with trying to think, everybody was in it. Mark Gray on keyboard, and Richie Morales and Barry Finnerty and Neil Jason. That was the core.
Exactly. Yeah.
And man, they were really slamming back then. So there's some really great videos out there. That particular gig, which they released, was a radio broadcast.
Oh, okay.
And the tour manager, who I'm still friends with, he became a very well-known concert promoter, reminded me that we were late for the gig. We almost missed the gig because I have no recollection of this particular gig, none at all. We barely made the gig, and after the gig, we loaded up and we had to drive somewhere else.
Yeah.
So to me, it sounds like we didn't have quite enough time for a sound check. It's like they're doing the sound check during the gig because we literally just set up and played. But it's still, you get a really good idea of the way the band was smoking.
Yeah.
Even though it's kind of mistakes, and I can hear stuff like Mike had some kind of a pedal that was a pitch shifter, and he couldn't shut it off. So I remember we set up so fast, something wasn't set up right. So the repeat thing he had to unplug it to stop it. So little things like happen like that during that. For me, they're hilarious. So it was great to hear.
Yeah, but you guys are like Mike solo on Strap Hanging. I think it's the first one. It's just like, it's like, okay, that's it, man. I wanted to ask, you know, I've done some touring, and like my longest tour was like 14 concerts in 15 days. But you know, you guys probably did like incredibly long tours, and I wanted to ask you, you know, we're talking about late 70s times where there was still the wall, there was still, you know, kind of Yugoslavia, like there was still East Germany. How was it like for you guys to travel in Europe at that time?
Well, it's a good question. It wasn't that bad. It hasn't actually changed that much. I went to Yugoslavia because there were some big festivals there. Several times, I remember, with the Mingus Dynasty Band, and probably with my brother. We went there to various areas several times. And you could even go into East Germany. We did some gigs there. You go through the checkpoint, et cetera, et cetera. So it was easier than you might think. And I also did, this was interesting, in or I think it was 1988, a State Department tour to Eastern Europe before the fall of communism, only 6 months before. So we went to Bulgaria. I think we made a couple stops in Yugoslavia, Romania,
Wow.
a couple other of the satellite countries. And that was really interesting to see what it was really like behind the Iron Curtain, particularly Romania was tough, man.
It was still Ceausescu there, right? I mean,
and they eventually just took him and his wife out and shot at both of them. But that was really tough living. Bulgaria was a little better. Yugoslavia was better, you know, but that was the worst. So I really saw the effects of that communism had on human life. It was terrible. But the traveling was always, I back then at least, I still do in a way. I enjoyed sightseeing and meeting the people and seeing the different cultures and how one culture affected the other, and how jazz and American music fit into everything, and how much it was soaked up by particularly Eastern European audiences. To this day, some fabulous musicians. I love going to that part of the world. Now you can travel a lot more freely, and it's the whole spirit is different. Although lately it's kind of taken a little stiffer turn for the worse, sadly. But it's still, I'm always inspired by Eastern European musicians, man. It's just fantastic.
Different vibe, yeah. I mean, definitely. Well, it's funny. Like, I don't know, when I see you guys on that footage, it's like you and Mike, Norway TV recorded, and you guys seem a little bit fried. I guess it was like a 27th gig, but the video ends like really in a romantic way. You guys walking and you ask like someone, well, where's the nearest bar? So,
that could very well be.
It's quite cool, but like, you know, it's fun to see those footage, like, you know, different fashion, and you guys like with your things walking there. And I love that.
Yeah, we were really, we were younger and taking advantage of everything we could. But at the core was, you know, the band was great, and we loved to play and play for people. And none of us, when we were starting the whole thing out, ever thought we would ever reach that level of popularity and acceptance. So it was still a thrill to be doing all this stuff and playing alongside a lot of our heroes on a lot of the concerts.
Yeah, I saw also you played. There's one footage from Munich with Dizzy.
Yeah, that's.
How was that like? I mean,
well, this is funny because I had mentioned the gig in Hamburg. Once again, we were somehow late to the gig, as happened. You know, there was trains were on strike all the time, flights canceled. You always had to hope for the best, especially doing one-nighters. You know.
Yeah.
So we show up at the last minute. We're not completely set up. George Wein comes out because he's worried about the time, overtime or whatever. Dizzy was going to sit in with us, and he just announced us. And we weren't really plugged in yet, so we had to start to play. And Dizzy came out, and he sounded great, and I did as good as I could. But if you notice, it's a subtle thing, but the trumpet mic, the whole concert was off. You can kind of hear me a little through, you know,
other mics catching, or
the other mics catching, but my mic was actually turned off. Somebody didn't plug it in, so that's my main memory. I was trying to get them. I thought it was just the monitor, but the mic was off because on the recording you can't really hear a direct sound. But it was a thrill playing with Dizzy. He looked a little uncomfortable, I think, coming out and playing with us because he didn't know the tunes. We tried to do stuff that he obviously could hear, but eventually I got to be pretty friendly with Diz, especially when he turned 70, and there were a lot of Dizzy tribute concerts to him with 3 or 4 trumpet players, and he was just a magnificent, such an intelligent human being, a real genius. So I was very proud of that relationship.
Yeah, he seems such a nice man. I mean, everyone who had the chance to play with him say this, that he was like one of the kindest musicians ever.
He was wonderful.
Yeah, But speaking of dizzy, I wanted to ask you this. You know, when you came up, like we're talking about the 60s, I guess. You know, nowadays the trumpet heritage, it's incredibly long and big, you know, including you and so many other incredible musicians. I don't know, Lou Soloff or many underrated players. Or
Yeah.
But when you were starting, it was basically just, you know, Miles, Clifford Brown, and maybe some other guys, like, of course, Dizzy. Like, how do you see that? How did you see that when you started? Like, this trumpet heritage behind you, before you?
Well, I was lucky in the fact that my father was a musician first. He had a day job as a lawyer.
Yeah.
But he was a piano player and a composer and singer, all very good. He wrote a song about me, forecasting that I would be into music and play a horn when I was 2 weeks old. He said I'd play a horn, maybe a hot fife, and love music even more than my wife. And I was only 2 weeks old. So I was forecast into that lifestyle. And he loved trumpet players because in Philadelphia, Clifford Brown's home base was in Philly with Max Roach. They played there all the time. There were some other great players in town and from Philly, Johnny Coles, Bert Collins, of course, Lee Morgan, who I eventually met. We had the same trumpet teacher for a while.
Oh, wow.
So I was quite aware of the trumpet from hearing all these great Clifford Brown, Miles Davis, and also Chet Baker records at home.
Oh, yeah.
So I fell in love with the sound right away. And in third grade, when I was 8 years old, we lived in suburban Philadelphia, and they only had trumpets or clarinets available to study. So I grabbed the trumpet right away because I knew I wanted to play that, and started to study with a guy from the Philadelphia Orchestra. But I already, at least of the current history, I knew all the names, and I could identify different trumpet players. Yeah. I didn't go back past Dizzy. I didn't know anything about Roy Eldridge, a little about Louis Armstrong, but it all started with the beboppers because that was what my father was. And I was always an avid listener, so as new people came along, he had a pretty extensive record collection that I got, when I got a little older, I got deeply into. And some of the lesser known players I got into very heavily with, like Kenny Durham, of course, live with Art Blakey and Art Farmer. Later, Freddie Hubbard. I remember the first time I heard him, which was on Blues and the Abstract Truth.
Oh, yeah, shit, yeah.
My mind. And I was just in love with the instrument. And there was also a great trumpet player who ended up in Detroit named Bobby Mojica, who would come over and be a part of jam sessions in our living room on weekends. And he was a great player. He sadly just passed away, but he played in that kind of Philadelphia trumpet tradition with a big open sound, great harmonic notes, very melodic player. So I got to hear a really good trumpet player as a kid. I was shocked. Last time I saw him, he gave me a CD of stuff he had been doing all these years in Detroit. And man, he could play. In fact, at first I said, well, you know, he sounds like me a little, but then I realized I sound like him because I was 8 or 9 years old when I first heard him. It must have all internalized itself a little. And I'm always, like I said, been a big listener. So I try to hear all the younger players and all the guys on the here or there, European players, Japanese guys. You know, I love the instrument, classical trumpet players. I love the whole aspect of trumpet playing.
Yeah.
I can't do it, some of it too well, but you know, the lead guys, I just love the whole instrument.
Yeah, you can hear that. I think still now you love with your latest project, you love all the facets of music, which I really like. You know, listening the records you put out in the last year, it's just like, throughout your career,
different things.
Yeah, I love that actually. I mean, that's so cool. But
thank you, Samo.
You mentioned, like, I've read somewhere that I don't know if this is correct, that the first time you went to Europe was also in the 60s, where you went to this trumpet competition and you met also all these trumpet players, like Thomas Stanka. And what's the story behind here?
Well, this is another good story, and it started out with our college band, Indiana University, won the Notre Dame Jazz Festival in 1965. We had a particularly good band, and we were far and away the best band. We deserved that prize. This was the Notre Dame Jazz Festival, was the festival all the college bands would practice all year to go and try to compete against one another. And Clark Terry was one of the judges, and he gave me a trumpet award at that. That's where we met. And there were I think Oliver Nelson might have been one of the judges.
Wow.
Anyway, one of the prizes was a trip, if we wanted it, to the Middle East and Asia, a State Department tour.
Oh, okay.
So off we went in February of 1966 to a 16-week. This was a long tour, one-nighters, and not all one-nighters, but it was 16 weeks on the road.
That's 4 months. Wow.
4 months. Imagine that. And I'm like barely 20 years old. We had a great band. We toured all the great countries. We spent time in Baghdad, Tehran, all the places where they're having really big problems now. Sri Lanka. Me and some friends even went into Afghanistan, where we stowed away on a bus and went to a place called Thieves City, which was run by tribesmen, all with blunderbuss kind of rifles, and it was all stolen goods off trucks. The whole city was just stolen material from trucks. So it was a wild tour. But at the end of the trip, where we were pretty exhausted, but we noticed that there was an international jazz competition, all instruments actually, in Vienna. And the judge, so the 4 or 5 of us who were doing this jazz soloing, we ended up in Greece, I think, and we took a train, figured out how to get to Vienna, and competed in this competition. And that was really exciting. The judges at this one, I'll never forget, because I got friendly with a lot of them, was Art Farmer, Cannonball Adderley, J.J. Johnson,
Wow.
Joe Zawinul, Ron Carter, and Mel Lewis. And we're all going, oh man, and we were like kids. And we had to stay there for about 10 days, because there were hundreds of kids there. And it's true, that's where many of us met. We were staying in a youth hostel.
Wow.
So not only trumpet players, like this is where I met, you mentioned Tomasz Stanko, Claudio Roditi was there, but also other instruments. Imagine, this is where I'll go leave. There were so many people. Miroslav Vitus, who was 17. Jiri, George Mraz, who was maybe 18. Jan Hammer, Joachim Kuhn, Jiggs Wiggum, Eddie Daniels was there, Franco Ambrosetti, who, so, and I'm leaving out a whole bunch of other people, Americans and otherwise. This was very influential because a lot of us decided to move to New York, Miroslav, Jan, and Mraz particularly, so we helped each other in New York. And it was just a wonderful meeting place. I won second prize trumpet. Franco beat me by a tenth of a
Franco
point.
won. Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. And we're still friends. We play together. We haven't in a year or two, but we still tour together when we can. I'm very close to his whole family, and he's very close to my wife, and I'm close to his wife. But that's where we met. He was a little older. Eddie Daniels was also already playing in Mel's band. They were about 5 years older than the rest of us, and they sounded just great, you know. So that was a fascinating, really, end to the trip. And I stayed in Europe after that. I had met some musicians saying, we're going to Germany, we're going here, Wolfgang Downer. So I ended up, make a long story short, in Munich at the Domicile, which was run by a guy named Ernst Nauf. And I played with Don Menza and Benny Bailey, and boy, people would come in and out of the club. I worked there pretty much around that area in Germany the whole summer, and then moved to New York after that.
Wow. Did these connections that you established there also help you then when you went to New York in the beginning already? Or
yeah, it already, because particularly Miroslav came shortly after I did, and he just blew everybody away. And all the judges were very nice to us. They were all not Cannonball, but basically Mel Lewis, Ron Carter. Mel invited me to join Thad and Mel band. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, Ron Carter started to use me on some gigs, and Miroslav came, and everybody wanted to play with him, and we jammed together a lot. So it was like kind of a snowball effect. Jan Hammer and Mraz went to Berkeley for about a year, I think, which is where I met Harvey Mason. We had a jam session. I was playing with Horace Silver by then. Yeah. So it's funny how it's all connected.
Yeah, I see that now.
It's wild, and it's also happenstance, the whole just ironic happenstance of the whole thing. But that competition really helped all of us, just because we were a little clique by the time we got to New York. And we stayed friends all these years.
Yeah, I mean, but so basically that means when you came to New York, it was not like a really rough start in a way for you, like, because you immediately got the rolling effect going on, or?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
I was really, really lucky. I knew one guy in New York. His name was Alan Faust. He sadly passed away a few years ago. He was an arranger on his way up in New York. He ended up writing a lot of jingles and being successful. So he introduced me to a lot of people in the studio scene, but it was also that competition and just meeting those guys, and we stayed in touch, so we knew where we were, and we started doing jam sessions. Yeah, it just all was a snowballing kind of effect. So I had a really, I must say, an easy time of it when I got to New York. Some people are there for years before they get a gig, and I'm very thankful of the way it worked out for me, because I was working pretty almost as soon as I got there, much to my amazement.
Yeah,
and meeting all these guys, it was just amazing. I had to pinch myself. Oh, Clark Terry called me and asked me to join his big band. I go, wait, did I just hear that? That's Clark Terry on the phone.
Yeah, it's one of those stories, right? When people call you, like these, like, how did the Horace Silver gig happen? I mean, I listened to that album. You gotta take a little love. I love that. And
well, that was a little more of a process, because Horace was very careful about hiring sidemen, but somehow I got recommended, probably by Woody Shaw, because we were the same age, and we had met. Woody had heard me play in Seattle. He was out there with Horace, and there was a jam session in the club that they were playing, and we kind of palled around, and once again in Seattle for a week. We were the same age, 19 years old, and we felt an affinity for each other, and he explained what it was like in New York. So I'm pretty sure he recommended me, but Horace had auditions, and at first, he kind of had the gig anyway. Charles, I can never remember his last name. He was with Max Roach.
Charles Tolliver.
Charles Tolliver. I don't know why I can never remember. So he got the gig. He had been playing with Max Roach originally. I don't think he auditioned, but I had the chance to audition for him. I was playing with Blood, Sweat, and Tears also at the time, strangely enough. But eventually, Horace got tired of Tolliver was kind of floating between Horace, and he was trying to keep both gigs going at once. And so Horace called and told me the whole story, that Tolliver's been spreading himself too thin, so would I like the gig? And I had to think about it for a second, because Blood, Sweat, and Tears was kind of on their way up, but I didn't get enough chance to play in that band. I learned a lot about the business of music, and touring around with them was amazing, because you play huge stadiums. We went out to California and played at Winterland and Fillmore East, with opposite bands like Cream and Stevie Winwood and Traffic, and thousands of people. I was used to playing at the half note with Duke Pearson or Clark Terry's big band in front of 20 people. So that was an interesting year with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but eventually I really wanted to get back to playing. and they were going to hire another lead singer. His name was David Clayton Thomas, and I decided to leave. I said, you guys will never make it without, they were going to fire Al Cooper, who's got the band together. I remember I said, you guys are never going to make it without Al, and I'm leaving. I'm going to join Horace Silver, where I got a great chance to play.
Yeah.
Of course, their next record with David Clayton Thomas sold 11 million records.
Yeah, it was like, yeah.
And Horace told me we'd be making $250 a week, and we work 3 weeks a month, which sounded pretty good. I was only making 100 a week with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But he forgot to tell me that he'd take taxes out. So I actually got 147 a week. And he also forgot to tell me that I had to pay for my own hotel.
Oh, no. Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
So at the end of the week, it was, okay, Randy, you owe me $50. And Benny Maupin, you owe me $80. But it was a great band. Billy Cobham on
Billy
drums.
Cobham, yeah.
Fresh out of the Army. So I really learned so much on that gig. John B. Williams on bass. We were really a hot group.
Wow.
And I got to play, every tune. It was a jazz gig. It was great.
Yeah, but it's like you're speaking about Horace Silver, forgetting to mention all these things.
Well, that was Horace. I got to know him better.
But how was Art like, Blakey? Like, was he the same, like this old school band leader kind of?
Yeah. Well, Horace was a little more trustworthy.
Okay.
In a way. But he was, as he put it, Horace liked to say his father, I just read his autobiography, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And he mentions this, that his father taught him the value of thrift. So he saved every receipt. If you spent $2 or borrowed $2, he made you pay him back with interest. He was very careful with his money. And he never paid a lot. He was this, as we put it, one of the cheapest mofos I'd ever met.
Yeah.
But he was a great guy, he could always dependable. And Art Boo had a lot more, I suppose, heart, I guess, but he was somewhat undependable, sometimes he didn't get paid right away. He'd disappear for a while. You read all the stories. He had
sure.
Substance abuse, as we call them now, problems.
Yeah.
So he was rather undependable, but boy, he just swung his ass off.
Yeah, he was an incredible musician.
You just disregarded all that stuff. And he was a sweet man. I was happy to know him too.
Yeah.
It was another good band. I spent about 8 or 9 months with him.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, but did you because this kind of goes hand in hand with you becoming like the band leader for this, releasing your debut. Were these guys, these greats that you played with, encouraging you to do that, or how did the score happen? I mean, the score is amazing, by the way. Still,
thank you.
After 53 years, it's...
Well, we lucked out with that one. Well, they weren't really encouraging me, but I was thinking about it, and it's hard to explain, but with me leaving Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and by then they were all close friends of mine. Still, Lou Soloff was. I got him in.
I love Lou, man.
I got him in the band. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to play in a rock band, but we both were sitting next to each other at a Joe Henderson big band rehearsal. I had just given Blood, Sweat, and Tears my notice, and I said, Lou, look, I'm leaving Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I'm in a spot here because Horace is starting up. You want to do it? And he said, no, I don't want to play in a rock band. But by the end of the rehearsal, I had him talked into it because you get paid a salary whether you work or not. So I said, look, it's $100 a week. Even if you don't have any gigs, that's two $50 gigs you don't have to do. That's the way we talked. So he went and did it, and we were best friends till the day he passed away.
Yeah.
So I still, I was kind of a little jealous that they made all that money, and I think that's what instigated the fact that I wanted to try to do some of my own records and try to build a name for myself, rather than even though I was starting to do a lot of studio work too, but that muse got triggered in the back of my head, so I started writing music. Yeah. Also, Duke Pearson, in whose big band I was playing, offered me the record deal. So that's specifically how it came about. and I pulled various friends together that I had met along the way. I had written some material. A good friend of mine, Hal Galper, we talked about, had some material that I thought would all fit together in a nice way. So we went in the studio. We had 6 hours to record the whole friggin' thing, and here it is. It's still out there. So
wow.
it
6
was
hours.
a wonderful.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's what you had. Most of those jazz records you had, unless you had a big budget. But I was a new guy, and they had it budgeted for 6 hours of recording, and then the next day we mixed it for the next day, and that was it.
Wow.
So you couldn't really fix too much or anything. We just had a good day and a lot of fun. It was interesting too because Duke Pearson, who didn't play but wrote a couple of arrangements and was the producer, had never heard of. I had brought in these guys, the funk guys, on some of it, Bernard Purdie and the great Chuck Rainey, who I had done amazing sessions with, and he knew nothing about them. He'd never heard of either of them. I don't think they had ever had an electric bass on a. This was really Blue Note Records. It was Solid State, which was a part of Blue Note. So I think it opened his eyes a little too, because it was a little unique for their label, and it was truly jazz rock. My old friend Larry Coryell was on some of it, and Hal and Mickey Roker, Eddie Gomez. So it was a weird conglomerations of guys.
Incredible band.
And then I just wanted to have rather than just have a slot for myself, I always wanted to try to keep writing throughout the years. Particularly, it's funny how you use kind of negative thoughts. Eventually, we had a band called Dreams with Billy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. Is one of the most underrated bands ever, I think. Really.
Well, what happened with that was that we were with Horace, with Billy, Benny Maupin, John B. Williams, me, and Horace for about a year and a half constantly. In California, he broke the band up all of a sudden. He gave us 2 weeks' notice, and that's how I ended up going with Art Blakey. There was an opening there, and I think once again Woody recommended me. That wasn't an audition. It was just come on up and play. Carlos Garnett was in the band. He had some tunes, and I knew the rest of the repertoire. I hadn't really officially thought about writing, but then Art Blakey disappeared for a while, and Mike was in town, came to town, had met Barry Rogers, and who in turn met two singer-songwriters, Jeff Kent, Doug Luban, and they were looking for a trumpet player and a drummer. And me and Billy were basically out of work. So we said, well, how about us, my brother? So that's how the band came together. They hired me and Billy, and that was the nucleus of the band. And we got pretty popular. I mean, it was mainly due, well, it was everybody. Barry Rogers, of course, a great trombonist. We were a hell of a horn section. We rehearsed every day. We never wrote anything down. I wanted this to be different than Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I didn't want to just read charts, because that was part of the reason that a lot of the horn bands got boring, because it was all written out. You get to play a little solo, but then back to the whole tones, and whatever they had, you had to play the same charts every night. So we literally jammed up all the music.
So, but how did the arrangements happen? Because it's still so tight. I mean, like, it's incredible.
Well, we recorded everything. We brought all the cassettes home. We listened. The next day, we had the Genesis. We had heard what we had done the day before. This is really true. We never wrote anything down. We just, Barry had he was the centerpiece of that, I think, because he had experience in all the Latin bands, Eddie Palmieri, foremost among them. And he was great at just thinking up lines, and we'd figure out harmony parts, or if I thought up a line, he'd figure out a harmony part, or we just had an affinity to be able to do that. And sometimes we each had completely separate parts that didn't match with just what it fit, and we just had a nucleus of charts, but it kind of grew every night. So nothing was ever written out. There was one shout chorus that I wrote out on a tune called New York City. That was written out, and then we voiced it, we jammed on that. But everything else, the Doug and Jeff songs were really open harmonically, so there was a lot of room for experimentation.
That's incredible.
And that was also, then we got signed to Columbia Records and did a couple. We became pretty well-known house band at the Village Gate in New York, which was a big club. We played there quite a bit as the opening act. We were kind of the house band. That's how Clive Davis heard us and signed us to Columbia Records. We opened for a lot of comedians, Richard Pryor among them. That was always great.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was a fun time. And that led to, getting back to my original thought. But anyway, at one point in time, we had been together for a year. John McLaughlin had come to New York, and actually came to New York and was staying coincidentally at my apartment with me and Dave Holland. They needed a place to stay for the time being, and I was on the road a lot. He came to New York to play with, kind of getting out of sequence here, to play with Tony Williams, that trio. In fact, I went to their very first gig at Count Basie's.
How was that like?
With Larry Young. Well, I had never heard anything like that. There were only about 10 people in the audience. Me and Dave Holland went, and they played, Larry Young, John McLaughlin, who I had just met. When I got home from a Horace tour, there was this guy sitting on my bed, and I was kind of pissed off at Dave because he was supposed to stay at my pad, Dave Holland. And here this other guy was there, and they kind of trashed my apartment. And when I opened the door, it was like orange peels in the all over the floor in the flue. But anyway, he brought out his guitar, and I went, holy moly. We went to their first gig. They didn't stay together that long, but eventually we had been together. McLaughlin was going out on his own, and he chose Billy to be his drummer for Mahavishnu Orchestra. And that was the end of dreams. We tried about 60 other drummers, but nobody played at that time. There were a couple good guys. Steve Gadd tried out, but he was still a jazz drummer.
Oh, wow.
Great drummer. We finally just kind of gave up, and the band dissolved, and Maha did their first record. And I remember having it on. It was great. We were still friends. When I say mad, I wasn't, really mad. It was just, I said, but I was listening to that first record, and I remember having the thought, this time I'm really going to do it. I can write my own music. We're going to start some kind of band, and I'm going to write everything. I just felt I could do it, and I wanted to do it. I remember listening to that record, the first Maha record, and that's what I set my sights on, whatever year this was. 1973, 1974. Eventually, as you know, Maha broke up. They didn't last that long. It was all kind of personality clashes. And next thing I know, Mike and I are back with Billy Cobham Spectrum. And when that lasted for a couple years, we did a lot of recording. But during that period, I was writing a lot too. In fact, the original Skunk Funk was recorded by Billy on one of the records. When I found the score, it was actually written for trombone. I had written that tune for Billy's band and a couple other things. But
you remember how you wrote that one? Like where did it come from? I mean,
well, that's a whole discussion, because it was like putting a giant puzzle together. A lot of that music, the Brecker Brothers music, and I remember. When I was playing, this goes back to playing with Horace, we did some kind of TV show for an educational station. The Horace Silver Quintet, and Muhammad Ali was also on the show. It was a black-owned PBS, as they say, public broadcasting system. I think the show took place in Chicago. It was actually called For Blacks Only. And they had a set which had a door above it. Instead of whites only, it said For Blacks Only. And Horace, I'll tell you about the interview first, but this is one of the greatest moments of my life. Muhammad Ali gave the first interview, and it was just great. We're standing like 10 feet from him. But during the break, I decided to walk through the For Blacks Only door. as a joke. And Billy and
Oh,
Benny were standing there, and Muhammad Ali was kind of looking too. And I walked through the door, and he comes up to me with his fist, like kidding around like he would do, hey, and he started walking at me like this. That's the greatest moment of my life. 20 seconds.
with Muhammad.
With Muhammad Ali coming up to me like
Oh,
that.
man.
But anyway, in answer to your question, then Horace gave an extensive interview, and he said the same thing, because they asked the interviewer asked him about, he had written so many tunes and what was the process like. And he also said, it's many times it's like putting a puzzle together. And that's certainly true with Skunk Funk, where I had little pieces here and there. Like Dreams, I was very careful about recording everything. I just would sit at a piano, record everything. I didn't have a multi-track recorder yet. This was in the early 70s. I had 2 cassette recorders, and I would ping pong tracks back and forth. I'd record and then play that and play something else on the other one, and it got the 2 tracks and then go back to the other one. And eventually the tune came together really piecemeal. And I've mentioned this many times. It's kind of interesting. The intro that goes every bar on that was played at a different time by a different instrument. That's how piecemeal it was. Like the that was the trumpet line. I remember where I was sitting when I played that, and I do that when I practice. I just play. If a line comes out I like, I write it down.
Okay, so it's still the same. Wow, cool.
So I remember thinking, well, that's a little like Miles's Mode, the tune, but let's write that down. Then the next bar, I like to play clavinet, and I do triplets. I had played with Stevie Wonder by then too for a few months. That's another story. So I was pretty adept at watching him, and I played, like just tripletty. It was a way to get a funky thing going on clavinet. So the did-it was a clavinet thing. I just had a long thing, but I stuck it in one bar. The da-da-da. The clavinet was on top of a Fender Rhodes suitcase model, and that register, sharp 9 chords in the lower register, were great. So that was the third bar. That was another day. Da, da, da. I'll say, maybe I'll make that the third bar. And we'll still go. So we got boom, boom was probably clavinet.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. The did it. Did it. By then there was so much bleed on the 2 cassette players that was an accident. That the did it was some kind of previous take that bled through.
Wow.
And I said, no, that did it. It's pretty hip. So let's write that in the score, even though that was an accident. And then the that was the trumpet line. So that's what I mean about putting a puzzle together. And I didn't know if that was going to be the intro or what it was going to be, but at least it was something.
Snippets or something.
And then the bump 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 bump, that became like the A section kind of vamp under that. That was probably clavinet. And I thought of lines going back to my David Baker at Indiana University Lydian concepts. That's why there's a kind of a sharp 4. It's all many things involved. And doodle tonguing, we play it one short. Da, 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 da. Next time it comes in, it's da, 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 da. So little things, as you write, you try to develop little things that can change all the phrases. The bridge, for instance, which went that came about with the thought. It wasn't a thought. It was like just a happenstance. Don Grolnick lived around the corner. Before he had a piano, he had a loft. He eventually got his own piano. But he would come over and he'd play my piano, and he was trying to learn to play like Richard T. more. Richard was all of our idol, the stuff, all the records, the Aretha records. He just had a way, man. We just flipped out over it, and we got to play with him quite a bit, did tours with him. But he'd come over to my house and he'd be trying to play like Richard T. and he'd play this rhythm. Dun, 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 dun. That's kind of Richard's basic thing when he would play. So that kept in my head. So I needed a bridge, and I thought of and I just added each time some tension notes. And it was like a G7, but I added like little tension notes and maybe changed the bass notes a little. I didn't know the reference was more like a melodic minor modal harmony, although I didn't realize it at the time. But those are just some ideas to show you how complicated and it was time consuming writing this stuff. But when you have several ideas, the puzzle becomes a little clearer, as you would say. Like when you put a puzzle, when you have it half done, it starts to get easier because the whole thing kind of reveals itself, and it's easier to, when you have all the parts in place, you can make an arrangement. But that took probably several weeks to write, and I had score paper and a pencil.
Yeah. Did you change it also? Like once you guys played it, or?
Yeah, well, we did. We didn't change it that much because I had written all the bass. Everybody had a part to play. But what we did do, the more we played it, actually, for one of the rehearsals, Harvey Mason was there for the recording band. As a joke, we decided to play it really fast.
Wow.
The tempo was really bump, like it was on the record. So as a joke, we played it, and sure enough, but after playing it all these years, we'd try to play it as fast as we could because we were so sick of playing it, and I would make light of the whole thing. I'd say to the audience, we're going to play this tune as fast as is humanly possible. And it became like a running like competition to see who could play skunk funk faster. But the first time we did it, it was a complete joke. We thought it was the funniest thing we ever heard.
That's incredible. That's
But it's shown the test of time. It's like a rite of passage now. Yeah. There's a video that my good friend Louis Juritz, who's a wonderful archivist, particularly of Mike stuff. He's a saxophonist, and you can find this on YouTube. There's a version of Skunk Funk where Louis edited every bar is a different band.
Wow, I have to check this out.
Check that out. It's really interesting. Wow. Every bar is a different band, and so there's a lot of versions of that tune on YouTube. And in answer to your question, we had different versions. Sometimes we did it as a blues. There was one time where Mike Stern figured out a little part. I forget what it was, kind of like a Milesy thing, and I would play over that. So there are different versions, but the basic parts kind of stayed the same. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, it's just you mentioned Mike, right? I mean, he's, for me, I think I transcribed like 30 solos of his.
Sure.
I still am such a huge fan, but you guys together, I mean, like from the first record, I guess the score is you sound so tight together, and you were so young. Like, how did you guys like play at home also together, like as a horn section, or?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and the truth of it is no. At home we didn't, because when Mike got. It's interesting now that you bring it up. Mike didn't get really serious about playing until I had left for college. Wow. He got more serious in the 9th grade, however old he was. I remember he was playing alto. And the reason it comes back to me, because he started on clarinet.
Yeah.
And he studied clarinet for like 6 years. I was also, gentleman, Leon Lesser from the Philadelphia Orchestra. I was studying with Sigmund Herring from the Philadelphia Orchestra. Mike started 3 years after I did, because he's 3 years younger, 3rd grade. He didn't want to play the same instrument as me because they only had trumpets or clarinets still in this little school. And he never took to the clarinet. He didn't serious, but he got a great foundation, and he always had the technical ability and a lot of talent. But his main love was his chemistry set. He loved basketball. So as a matter of fact, we really didn't play together at home because I had left. I would send him my David Baker lessons. He was playing with Mark Copeland, Mark Cohen then.
Yeah.
Mark Copeland and Eric Gravatt, they had a group and they backed up Billy Paul, I think, for a while, the singer who became he was a jazz singer, became a pop singer, Me and Mrs. Jones. He had a big hit with Gamble and Huff. So I hadn't heard him play, and I hadn't played with him, and I didn't. This is interesting too. I've mentioned this before, but not recently. I was playing in 1968 with Horace Silver at the Plug Nickel in Boston. And I hadn't heard Mike play yet, but I knew he had a band, and he went to IU, Indiana University, where I went, and they had formed a band there. And people get this confused because it was a great trumpet player there named Randy Sankey, who's from Chicago.
Yeah.
And they had a band called Mrs. Seaman's Sound Band, and they happened to be living up the street from us in Chicago. They had a crash pad, and they were planning to play around Chicago. Their main claim to fame was having been kicked out of that same Notre Dame Jazz Festival. They were disqualified that year. They were far and away the best band, but they were disqualified for playing jazz rock instead of jazz.
That's
so
bizarre.
they were kicked out. It made the headlines at Downbeat because they were very good, but they played a jazz rock version of Light My Fire. I forget, I think the judges might have been, I think once again, Oliver Nelson and maybe, I forget, but they were a little closed-minded judges. Anyway, I decided to go hear the band. They were up the street. During the day, we decided to have a jam session, and I brought Cobham and Benny Maupin over to the jam session. We didn't really, I think I was maybe the only one that played a little, but we just wanted to hear the band. And that's the first time I had heard Mike, really, since playing clarinet. And all I can say is our jaws dropped. I'll never forget the look on Benny's face. He just went like, oh. Because he was like a diamond in the rough, but he still had consolidated the music of Coltrane with Junior Walker and King Curtis. And it was just something none of us had ever heard before. So I just, and that was the reason when I did score, I think he had just moved to New York, or maybe he wasn't even in New York. That was my recollection. I said, Mike's got to play on this record. And it was just, I think, some natural kind of thing, brother thing, or the fact that even though we didn't play together, we had listened to a lot of the same stuff, and we were in our living room hearing all these great musicians. And he did play a little drums when I was home and vibes. We had a little band, but the saxophone wasn't in the picture yet.
There's like this duo on the score. You guys also do. It's just like, wow.
Well, that's one thing we did. That's a good. We used to improvise duos in the bathroom, trumpet and clarinet, like nursery rhymes. Just because we were we were literally, 8. He might have been 8. I was 10 or 11 years old, and we liked the echo in the bathroom because we had kind of adjoining suite, his room, the bathroom, my room. So we'd get together after we had a practice and we would just play anything, the Pop Goes the Weasel. We liked the echo. We'd make up stuff and laugh and, have fun like two kids. So that was also part of it. But we weren't playing any funky horn licks yet.
Yeah, sure. But were there many times later, like when you guys played together? I mean, like, did he like amazed you? Like after, like first he played the solo and then were you many times like really blown away? Like really what?
Are you kidding? Blown away. I was so, it was more than blown away. There was nothing worse than having to follow Michael Brecker saxophone solo. That's why I'm as neurotic as I am. Years of that.
Oh my God.
And sometimes, every once in a while I got the best of them. Maybe every once out of 50 times. It was always healthy competition. But man, to this day, I know I'm prejudiced because I'm his brother, but and I go back and listen to not only stuff we did together, but all solo stuff. It just still, it just blows my mind.
It's like I did this talk with Bob Minster. And Bob told me like they had a session with, I think it was with Joachim Kuhn in the beginning of the 80s, And he said, like, before that, you didn't get sheet music in advance, and there was like this incredible changes. And he's Bob soloed on it, and I listened to the recording, and he's amazing, of course. And then Mike soloed, and Mike, he just it's
destroyed it.
Yeah, and he said he asked Mike, and Mike just had his eyes closed during.
Wow.
He didn't even look at the lead sheet. Bob said, like, I was like, wow,
Yeah, well, that sounds like it. And Bob's no slouch, man.
No, I mean,
that guy's great, and amazing internalized music. I have a good story about him too, just a short one, but it's
please share.
When we were together, I got to play with Bob, taking Mike's place in Jaco's word of mouth band.
Yeah.
When Mike decided to, he had substance abuse problems. He had gone to rehab in 1982, and wanted to start afresh. And thankfully, he did, and became a very important member of the 12-step program. Saved a lot of lives and brought people into it. Anyway, he left Jaco because to start steps ahead.
Yeah.
And I got the gig. I was thrilled, of course. Play with Jaco. Mincer was the other horn. And we also
have you met Jaco before already? Or
I had only met him. Mike and I played on his very first record.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On the one tune, come on, come
over. Yeah, I love that. Come on.
That's where we physically met, but I had heard about him. He was his word of Jaco, this guy in Florida, bass player, we all knew about him. We just hadn't met him or hadn't heard him yet.
Yeah.
But we did a gig, and we played together for a year. It got to be a great thing. It was a great band, and my playing got a lot better playing with these guys. But we're playing in Washington, D.C. We'll try to make this short. And I saw Mincer at a table with a piece of paper writing some music, and I went out there and looked at his shoulder, and he had written a tune called Peace for Bob's band, a big band piece, and he was writing the third trumpet part out. Wow. And I said, Bob, you don't need a score? Because that's how I had to write. I had a score. I wrote out the parts looking at. He said, no, man, it's all up here.
Wow.
So I go, whoa, okay.
Wow.
I'll let you do it. So that's the kind of a musician that guy is.
I love him. He's such a player, such a composer also.
Yeah. Still.
Randy, I just wanted to not to take too much of your time. Thanks so much for sharing all this. But I think you need an autobiography, by the way, or something.
These are good ones. You got some good ones today.
Because it's just like I'm like a small kid in a candy store. I just wanted to ask you this, because I'm always wondering about this. When I see the records you did, like in the 70s, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen, James Taylor, Lou Reed, Ringo Starr, if I talk about the pop rock acts, not even mentioning the jazz stuff, but how did a month, let's say in 1975, look like in that period for you?
75 particularly was just a very busy studio work year. We were also, trying to play too. That was we were lucky that we were really going out at night, and we had the gigs with Hal. Soon we were going to start 7th Avenue South, where we could really play whenever we felt like it. Yeah. But the main thing is, and the thrust of my life then was studio work, even more than Mike, because I was also doing a lot of jingles. Mike wasn't a doubler, so he wasn't on all the, he wanted to just play saxophone. He could play flute really well. He didn't want to touch the clarinet. He didn't like he could play any woodwind instrument, but this was an artistic choice. So he didn't get a lot of the jingle work, which luckily I only had to play trumpet or flugel. I could play a little piccolo. So that was the work. We did 10 or 15 sessions a week, and you never knew who we were going to, half the time, if it was a record date, half the time you didn't even know who the artist was. You'd know who the producer was. There was a thing called radio registry, Justin 2-8800. They would call you with a offer of a session. Hey, it's registry. We've got a 10 to 1, 2 to 5 tomorrow. And that's usually it was the next day or 2 days. you know, for whoever the composer was,
Yeah.
the writer. And sometimes they would say the sure we knew was for him. And you'd write it in your book. 1975. I actually found a 1975 date book, and there were like sometimes 2, 3, 4 dates a day where we just run from studio to studio. And then it all started to taper off in the mid 80s when synthesizers and drum machines and sampling, particularly sampling, that came in. I remember being called for what I was told was an experimental film, and I showed up as a jingle guy. And I showed up at his studio, and he had me play a chromatic scale and some high notes, some low notes, some staccato notes, and this and that. And I said, "Hey, what are we doing?" He said, "Well, it's an experimental film," but obviously he was sampling me. I didn't know what a sample was then. So when that started, all the work started, and then it was just like.
Yeah.
So we had to once again reinvent ourselves. Luckily, we had that kind of side career as performers and so to speak. So it didn't affect us, but it left a lot of the studio musicians just high and dry when work stopped.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But that's what it kind of was like. Every week was different. I enjoyed it, man, because you're never sure who was going to be there. You know, you'd see your friends. Sometimes you show up and the next trumpet player was Thad Jones on the jingle date, you know, or Ernie Royal or Snooky Young, Frank West. You know, those guys were still in town in the late 60s, early 70s. Mel Lewis might be on drums. Then the rock took over, so it was Steve Gadd, Rick Marotta, Chris Parker, and Richard T. and all those cats. That was a thrill too. Ralph McDonald, all those sessions, and Grover sessions. You know, it's just great. I loved it. So I could have done it the rest of my life as long as I was playing too and had projects going. But sadly, all that stuff stopped, and I became a road rat, so to speak, and went out on the road and did playing with a lot of different bands. It's kind of ironic. I did it in reverse, you know, because most guys go on the road when they're young, and when they're 40, that was the idea, to settle in New York and be a freelance studio guy. But mine was reversed. I went back on the road when I was about 40.
Yeah, but you love it on the road as well, right? I mean, it's
I love to play. The road after a while, the road got a little tiresome. You know, you love the 2 or 3 hours you get to play.
Yeah.
But sometimes just getting to the gig, boy, that's tough. And the hotels and one box after another, you know, the box of the plane, the box of your hotel room, box of your dressing room.
You're paid to travel, right? Who said that?
Yeah.
Art Pepper or someone? I don't know who said that.
Yeah, I think we're Phil Woods, one of those
or
guys.
Phil Woods,
I just read his autobiography too, so he's really good at explaining. A lot of sarcasm in that one.
Yeah. Can I ask you just one thing also? I think I have you in 2 albums. One of Jack Wilkins, and one of Bunky Green.
Oh yeah.
And these guys are so underrated in a way. Like how was to play with Bunky? Like how did that thing happen? You remember?
Well, I don't know how I got the call. I do remember somehow. Wow, because a lot of even the ones you mentioned, the big rock ones, I don't remember if they were run well. Like Lou Reed, that record, which is called Berlin. Then we went out for lunch with him. I have no recollection of the session because I think they had parts. We played them. It was really well run. Bob Ezrin, all his producing things, he really was organized. So you just go in, read the music, see you later, get paid, hopefully scale or double scale. So I don't remember the session. Same with all the, there was a band called Blue Oyster Cult, and with Steven Tyler, what's that band?
Aerosmith.
Aerosmith. I did
you did with them as well? Really?
I did like 4. They were all Bob Ezrin. I don't remember any of them.
Wow.
But the Bunky Green, because it was a jazz date, I remember it was at Vanguard Studios on 23rd Street. And I was just thrilled to be there. A guy named Danny Weiss, who I still work with occasionally, also signed Larry Coryell. That was a tradition. and it was a live session, so I do remember that one. And Bunky was very it was a wonderful, high-spirited guy. It was just joy in his music, and he became a very well-known jazz educator, probably one of the best knowns. And I recently, last couple of years, I found that record on iTunes or something, so it came out pretty good, I think.
Yeah, my man, your solo on the first song, East West, it's just like you're flying.
I'll have to re-listen.
Yeah, please.
And what was the other one you asked about?
Oh, and Jack Wilkins' Merch, I think.
Yeah, that's another great one. And that was done. We were playing together a lot at Sweet Basil.
With Jack.
With Jack and Jack DeJohnette and Eddie. We somehow I was that was right after Brecker Brothers broke, so a lot of people were showing up just because of my name. I was shocked. But we played together a lot, and a jingle friend, I forget his name, I have to look it up, had a studio and suggested that after the gig, why don't we come up to it and he'll record us. So that record was actually done, if I'm not wrong, after midnight, after playing at Sweet Basil a couple sets. And we just recorded it all in one fell swoop. And we had been playing and working, our chops were up, and it sounds really good. It was Jack is just fantastic, who never, he was one guy who just liked to play. He didn't really promote himself. He was fine playing around New York in restaurants and doing this gig, that gig. He had students. So he was just a kind of typical, I don't recall him even doing a lot of sessions. He just was on the playing scene, but he didn't really care about fame and fortune, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Randy, for sharing. I mean, I have so many other things, but to ask you, but
volume 2.
Volume 2. So I will not take too much of your time because I appreciate this already. So.
Okay, well, thanks, man. You were a great interviewer. This was a lot of fun. Brought back some good old memories.
Oh, it's so much, really. Thank you so much for the music, for the thoughts and everything. So hope to see you on the road somewhere in Europe soon.
Yeah, I hope so. Pull my tails if close to where you live.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk. So.
Okay, man. Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you. Bye,
bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye, bye.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.